Today we're talking about All About Love by Bell Hooks. I actually read this book last summer, but I wasn't really uploading very consistently all of last year because there was a lot going on in my life. But this is one book that I feel like out of all the books I read last year made a very strong impression. So I think it was yesterday or day ago I sat down and I kind of just like started going through the book, making some notes, because usually I speak very candidly in these reviews. I read a book, I don't usually have notes, I go by kind of memory, and I just, it's just vibes. I'm not someone who's taking a very technical approach towards reviewing these books for you. I just want to give you a general impression about my feelings towards a book. But when I haven't read a book for a while, I do usually like to go back and just get an idea of like what I highlighted. My annotations really help. And then when I started kind of looking through it, I found myself just sitting there and reading and reading and reading, and I realized how much of it I don't remember, but because there's so much amazing stuff in here that one read is definitely not enough. I think after I review this, I need to go back and reread it. I actually did reread a lot of the parts yesterday, and I have to say it must have been one of those books that probably changed the way I view writings about love or musings on love. It was really nice to read about love in a way, the way Bell Hooks portrayed it. So if there's one book about love, like I've read a lot about kind of nonfiction about general topics. I'm not very big on romance, but if there's one, I guess, book about love that I can recommend, it would definitely be this one. It's one of those books that became really, really popular on TikTok. A lot of people reading it. I can really see why though, because I feel like the way she tackles this, even though this book was written back in 2000, it's quite current, and I feel like currently, especially given the current dating scene and how much young people are struggling to find someone who have a similar notion or concept or understanding of love as they do, has been really, really difficult. So I can see why this is kind of coming up again now and why it's becoming so popular at the kind of moment. Quite a significant portion of the first kind of part of this book is what do you call it, like a foreword, I guess, like an introduction by Bell Hooks herself, where she speaks very candidly about her experience. And a lot of this book is not about like her relationship with her romantic partners, but more so just her general perception on what love is. And for that reason, she keeps referring back to her early years or when she was growing up and her experience of love very much from the beginning. So she does reference her familial relationships. A lot of it has to do with her feelings of abandonment when she was really, really young, and she doesn't go into much detail about it, but she did share that she feels that a lot of the way she tackled relationships in her adult life had a lot to do with the type of relationship that she shared with her family growing up. This book serves as a love letter to love, how love is an important concept and how it should be perceived and dealt with. She encourages readers to look within themselves and understand what love means to them and how much of that definition is genuine or just what they believe love to be. And while we're growing up, there's so many interpretations or meanings ascribed to the concept of love in media and pop culture, and this is what we understand it, what we see in movies, what we see in music videos, and how people write poems about it, people write songs about it, and that really does impact how we perceive love or what we expect in the name of love growing up. And this is where she kind of starts the conversation, which I think is a really valid place to start talking, because a lot of the times we might have this whether or not I have received love in life or whether or not I do understand, that is very much based on what my understanding of love is as a concept in the first place. And I think one of the most magical things that she talks about is how often, even in especially in today's world, when you look at modern dating and dating apps, how heartbreaking it can be. And I think heartbreak is one of the most painful experiences of each of our lives, and so much time and effort is put into getting to know people, and when we experience heartbreak, it can feel really soul crushing. But then she talks about how relentless people are in their kind of search for love, and how just because we've had one or two bad relationships, people don't easily give up. And that's not the case with everything in life. I feel like a lot of ventures and a lot of different areas, we are quite quick to feel like, giving up, or feel like, maybe this is not really for us. But love isn't really one of those things. No matter how much disappointment or how much, sadness we experience in the name of love, we're pretty relentless when it comes to our search for love. And I think another thing that she touches upon a little bit later in the book is that just because we might have not experienced love in its truest form growing up, and by that I mean we might have grown up in abusive relationships or abusive families, or just families that are dysfunctional and don't really show love in a very affectionate manner, doesn't mean that we entirely forget how to show love, or we are incapable of loving as adults ourselves. And I think that is also very telling of human nature, that just because a child is not shown love doesn't necessarily mean that the child never learns how to love. We still, like so many of us, grow up in homes where we don't necessarily experience love in a certain way, but we grow up to then show it to our own children, and we want to change the way we give love, and we want to be more explicit about it. And that kind of shows that it's very inherently built into people, and it's not a learned behavior. But a lot of the times what is learned is actually what makes love a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Another concept that I really enjoyed reading about was this whole cynicism that exists around love, especially among women. And I do want to read a small part that's to do with this, because I think I can't do a better job than what she's done in the book in kind of trying to explain this. We may be raising a generation of young people who will grow up afraid to love, afraid to give themselves completely to another person, because they will have seen how much it hurts to take the risk of loving and have it not worked out. I'm afraid that they will grow up looking for intimacy without risk, for pleasure without significant emotional investment. They will be so fearful of the pain of disappointment that they will forget the possibilities of love and joy. Young people are cynical about love. Ultimately, cynicism is the great mask of disappointment and betrayed heart. I feel like it is so telling of current times. People are quite reserved. They're becoming more and more reserved, becoming more and more closed, and taking a lot more time to open up. They're having a lot more trust issues. And I think all of these things are linked to that fear of being disappointed, or being, strung along where there is no future. And because life is getting more difficult and people are having more issues with money, economically, a lot more, like a greater part of the population are not seeing stability as quickly as the previous generations did, which makes it hard for them to commit into relationships and families. And that surfaces as just people kind of trying to experience the feeling of love without getting into these committed relationships, which I've been in the dating world very, very briefly about 2 years ago, and I experienced this firsthand, and it was actually really jarring for me, because I can be somewhat of a serial monogamist. I've always been in very serious relationships because I can't really wrap myself around the concept of just being with someone for the sake of it. But that's very much seems to be something that current society is moving towards. I don't think it's a good or a bad thing. I think it's just inevitably gone there because of where other things are headed. She also mentions this little quote from this book called Bitch in Praise of Difficult Women. None of us are getting better at loving. We are getting more scared of it. We were not given the good skills to begin with, and the choices we make have tended to only reinforce our sense that it is hopeless and useless. And this hopelessness, I feel like, is more coming up in literature with like if you read a lot of romantic works of current day, or even just, I guess, the books about situationships, which is very much taken over romantic. I feel like growing up, rom-coms and these books about like romantic relationships were such a big thing, and I feel like the previous generation, at least my parents' generation, had a more of a romantic idea about relationships. But my generation, I would say I'm like at the middle, somewhere at the edge of millennial and Gen Z. And then if you look at Gen Z, they're very realistic, very logical when it comes to relationships and love. And I think that is very telling of how people are becoming, and that's exactly what she said in this book, which I think is like pretty scary how accurately she's predicted it. Another concept she brings up is about love being instinctual, and this is something that I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the video, where she talks about why many of us, despite not having very, I guess, stable families or a loving upbringing, how do we still persist in love, or why is it expected that we learn about love in childhood when many of us actually don't? Again, I'm gonna read this part. Everybody assumes that we will know how to love instinctively. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we still accept that the family is the primary school for love. Those of us who do not learn how to love among family are expected to experience love in romantic relationships. However, this love eludes us, and we spend a lifetime undoing the damage caused by cruelty, neglect, and all manner of lovelessness experienced in our families of origin and in relationships where we simply did not know what to do. Only love can heal the wounds of the past. However, the intensity of our woundedness often leads to a closing of the heart, making it impossible for us to give or receive the love that is given to us. To open our hearts more fully to love's power and grace, we must dare to acknowledge how little we know of love in both theory and practice. And I think that is, again, the whole thing that this whole book is written about, that actually more than trying to find love and trying to basically force love, or trying to understand whether or not what we are feeling right now is love, I think it's more important to understand what love is, and actually beyond love, what are we looking for that will truly satisfy us and make us happy. I'll link this to a part that she mentions slightly later in the book, where she talks about how love cannot exist in isolation, and she talks about things like trust, commitment, care, respect, knowledge, respectability. All of these things are the true things that we actually look for when we're talking about love. And I'll add personally a couple of things to that. Adoration, admiration, understanding. When I think about what it is I'm looking for in a romantic partner or someone I want to spend my life with, it's definitely I want them to admire me, respect me, be adoring of me, have respect for just what I believe in, and have the respect to actually treat me with kindness and show me empathy. So all of these things are just, I don't want to say different ways to love someone, but these are the actual things that make relationships work and keep people together. Without these things, love in itself doesn't really do much. It's not enough to keep people together and stay in a relationship. And I feel like again and again, people go through so many relationships where they fall in love very quickly, and these other foundations are not existent, and that's why people fall apart. At a certain point, you either feel like the person doesn't really respect your decisions, or they don't adore you, but there's still love, and that's what makes a lot of people stay in that relationship. But is that a right thing? Should you just stay because you have that kind of familial, I guess, love towards someone, when you don't have these other very important foundations that actually make people look up to each other and adore each other, and just trust, I think, is such a big part of it. Page 11 here, quite a lot of notes. Why do we settle for loveless relationships? Even though we are obsessed with the idea of love, the truth is that most of us live relatively decent, somewhat satisfying lives, even if we often feel that love is lacking. In these relationships, we share genuine affection and care. For most of us, that feels like enough, because it's usually a lot more than what we received in our families of origin. Undoubtedly, many of us are more comfortable with the notion that love can mean anything to anybody, precisely because when we define it with precision and clarity, it brings us face to face with our lacks, with terrible alienation. If we say that love is trust, love is empathy, love is care, love is, I don't know, what else did she say? Respectability, adoration. Suddenly, if you say, oh, does he and she love me? Maybe yes. Do they respect me? Do they adore me? And if those answers are no, then suddenly it becomes hard to justify, or really hard truth to swallow. So we try to kind of go by different definitions of love, when if it boils down to the real definition, I guess it's a harder pill to swallow. So we kind of lie to ourselves, I guess. Authors suggest love should mean something different to men than it does to women, and I agree with this as well. I think, again, media portrayals or societal norms are so important, because they do socialize men and women differently, and the way men and women are supposed to show and receive love are also different, which I think it's not just problematic for women, it's also problematic for men, because most of the people I've dated have also wanted to be shown love and shown adoration and shown respect. It's not just one-sided. I think everybody wants to be shown love in a certain way, and it's not a male or female thing. And the fact that so many men are encouraged to kind of cringe at the thought of romantic love is actually really sad. I do have to say that if you grew up in a very loving household where, you know, like everything was always perfect, then maybe this book would be slightly difficult to I guess relate to. But at the same time, I think all of us can have challenges. I think parenting is an incredibly difficult thing, and many of our parents have struggled. We've struggled with our parents, so we can all somewhat relate at different levels, even if it's not to the level that the author has experienced growing up. But I did want to put that up before going to the next part, because she talks about how love is often confused or made to feel like an obligation. Being hurt by parenting adults rarely alters a child's desire to love and be loved by them, which means as we're growing up, because we see them as the most important people in our lives, people who we look up to more than anyone else, whether or not they treat us with love, we begin to see how they treat us as love, because that's what we're born into this world being told that our parents love us no matter what and no matter how they act. So the way they treat us become then the definition of love, and they treat us abusively. We grow up believing that abuse is love, because all of these are intertwined. And then when we receive abuse in our adult relationships, we think that it's normal when it's not. Children will want to remain with parental caregivers who have hurt them because of their cathected feelings for those adults. They will cling to the misguided assumption that their parents love them even in the face of remembered abuse, usually by denying the abuse and focusing on random acts of care. In the prologue, Creating Love, John Bradshaw calls this confusion about love mystification. He shares, "I was brought up to believe that love is rooted in blood relationships. You naturally love everyone in your family. Love is not a choice. The love I learned about was bound by duty and obligation." And I think this is kind of dying out right now, because a lot of people, as they're moving out and they're this type of space is being forced between families and young adults, people are finding more and more who they are independent of who their family is. And I think less and less people are finding it like an obligation to show love, and more so showing love because they want to, and out of kind of respect and out of care, and not so much out of obligation. I always think that if I ever in my life end up having a family and kids, I would not want to be loved out of obligation, but rather out of desire and out of respect. So it's a really tough thing, because obviously I'm not in the position of a parent, so I can't really speak for parents, but I think it is definitely a truth when on the other side I do agree that a lot of children growing up do feel that the obligation, not just with parents but also especially like extended family, to show love and show I guess some kind of like familiarity and some kind of desirability to spend time with them, when actually there is no natural desire. Another thing that's really true is that she talks a little bit about being honest and how honesty is really wrapped around love, because if people cannot be honest about their feelings, it's very difficult to be very honest with love. So for example, if someone does something that is, causes pain to you, if you're able to go up to them and tell them that, you know what, I love you, but what you did really hurt me, and the person acknowledges that and says, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that, or I didn't realize, my actions hurt you that way, and actually acknowledges your pain, and then you both are able to communicate, be honest with each other. And same, if they can be they can find themselves in the position to be able to tell you how they feel, you're both in a very healthy relationship where it's actual love. But a lot of the times, some people, when they go to people who are close to them and they tell them like, what you did actually really hurt me, or the way you treated me hurt me, and the other person becomes very like hurt by it, so they're like, oh, I didn't know that, I did my best, I'm really sorry if you felt that way, I tried my best, and like I'm obviously the worst person in the world because I treated you like that, and kind of makes you feel worse for actually being honest. And this prevents us from being honest in our relationships when we grow up. So as kids, if we're not able to tell our parents that they hurt us because it'll hurt them, so we tend to like basically hide our feelings more and more, in the fear that if we're truthful it'll hurt other people we care about. And this again manifests itself in adult relationships, where even if our partners hurt us, we never tell them because we fear that if we tell them, they'll leave us. There were certain things about spirituality, about the love ethic, and other things that she talked about, which I'm not religious at all. I don't believe in religion, but I believe in spirituality. If you believe in God, that's beautiful. If you believe in something higher than you, but religion as a institution, I'm not really a big fan of. So when she started to talk about these things, I'm like, I don't really know where this is going. But actually she turned around and she presented in a way that it made a lot of sense. And I'm not someone who dismisses things just because I personally have different views. So I do think that generally, the deeper she went into the topic, the more she included kind of different conversations and different topics into it. I think it's a pretty I guess like well-rounded exploration of love in modern society. This is Bell Hooks, all about love, and I hope you guys do pick it up. If you haven't really found a book from this channel in a while that you'd be interested in, I think this is definitely one that I hope you like. But yeah, if you read it, let me know. Really excited to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you guys next time.